Welcome to the World This Week, Episode 19, Chaos of the Old Order. This week, after the Russia-China summit, Trump's Iran meltdown, or is there peace this time? Can Cuba survive? I'm Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. The Russian and Chinese leaders declare unilateral attempts to dominate the world have failed, and a, quote, new type of international relations is emerging. Meanwhile, Trump loses it over Iran. One day war, one day peace, while he mulls invading Cuba. After their summit in Beijing on Wednesday, just days after Donald Trump's trek there, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin issued a communique that said in part, quote, attempts by a number of states unilaterally to manage global affairs, impose their interests on the entire world, and limit the sovereign and development of other countries in the spirit of the colonial era have failed. The system of international relations in the 21st century is undergoing a profound transformation, evolving toward a long-term state of polycentricity and the emergence of a new type of international relations. Most states, drawing on their historical experience, have deeply recognized the dawn of a new era and the need to pursue the path of forming a more cohesive international community, as well as mutual respect for fundamental interests, equality, justice, and mutually beneficial cooperation without dividing the world into opposing regions and blocs. On the other hand, the global situation is becoming more complex. Negative neocolonial tendencies, such as unilateral forceful approaches, hegemonism, and bloc confrontation, are on the rise. Fundamental, universally recognized norms of international law and international relations are regularly violated, and it is becoming more difficult for states to coordinate their actions and resolve conflicts within global governance institutions, many of which are losing their effectiveness. The global peace and development agenda is facing new risks and challenges, and there is a danger of fragmentation of the international community and a return to, quote, the law of the jungle. This is clearly not a settled matter, as the old, hopefully dying order, led by the king of the jungle, continues to sow chaos from Iran to Ukraine to Cuba. With us again to discuss the dramatic events of the week are former CIA analyst and briefer of Presidents Ray McGovern and Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, U.S. Marines counterintelligence officer, author, and pundit. Ray, before we get to the broad picture as expressed in the Xi-Putin summit and then bore down into the details, let's start with the latest news. At 4:30 p.m. on Eastern Time in the U.S., Donald Trump wrote on his social media account, quote, I'm in the Oval Office at the White House where we just had a very good call, and he names the leaders of the UAE and Qatar, and he said he also spoke with Marshal Saeed Asim Munir Ahmad Shah of Pakistan, President Erdogan of Turkey, President Sisi of Egypt, King Abdullah II of Jordan, King Hamad bin Isa al Khalifa of Bahrain, concerning the Islamic Republic of Iran and all things related to a memo of understanding pertaining to peace. An agreement has been largely negotiated, Trump says, subject to finalization between the United States of America, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the various other countries as listed separately. I had a call with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu of Israel, which likewise went very well. Final aspects and details of the deal, capital D, are currently being discussed and will be announced shortly. In addition to many other elements of the agreement, the Strait of Hormuz will be opened, and as he often ends his messages, thank you for your attention to this matter, Donald J. Trump. The New York Times reports, quote, there was no immediate confirmation from Iran or Israel, but, and this is significant, 3 senior Iranian officials said Tehran had agreed to a memorandum of understanding that would stop the fighting on all fronts, including Lebanon, reopen the Strait of Hormuz without any tolls, and lift the U.S. naval blockade on Iran. It then says the officials who spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly added that the fate of Iran's nuclear program, which had been a major point of contention, would be negotiated within 30 to 60 days. It was not clear whether the proposal the Iranian officials said they had agreed to was the one that Mr. Trump was referring to in his social media post. Ray McGovern, Is this just another case of Trump manipulating markets, facilitating between peace and war, in public losing his mind over this, between pressure to get out and pressure from Israel to continue? Or are we really on the cusp of a real peace to this awful situation in the Gulf?
Well, Joe, you put a damper on this thing. I was getting my spirits up. All you have to do is trust Trump, and it's going to be all right. This time, I think it may have a degree of reality to it. He forecast that he was going to talk to the Gulfies this afternoon. He's done so. Now we have. I hadn't seen this announcement. It's fresh off the press. But it does seem to me that those were the terms that could be accepted by Iran as well, particularly putting off any talking about reprocessing the nuclear issue to a second stage. 30 to 60 days is what I copied down from your notes. Um, yeah, let's hope that Trump realizes he's in a no-win situation, and there are people willing to smear enough lipstick on this pig of defeat to let him off and say, well, you have stopped Iran from getting that nuclear weapon which they aspired to, which they hoped to, which they had designed to, but for some reason we know never were working on the weapon part of things. Reprocessing, that's another thing. So, yeah, I welcome this news. Let's see what he says tomorrow.
Yeah. Scott?
Uh, let's just make it as clear as possible. The United States can't resume conflict with Iran. We're incapable of doing this. We don't have the military capacity to do this. The military has put Trump on notice that they're unable to fulfill this order. And the political consequences, economic consequences of Trump overriding their objections and insisting on it would be catastrophic for the world, for the region. Literally, you'd be seeing the United Arab Emirates commit suicide, cease to exist as a modern functioning state overnight. And they know this. And you'd also see, again, the collapse of the global economy. You can't remove 22% of the world's energy production capacity on a near permanent status, and the world won't adjust. It's just a statement of fact. So Trump can play whatever word games he wants. I mean, this is, it's word salad at this point in time. It's irrelevant. What the Iranians know is that the United States can't resume this. That doesn't mean we won't, because Donald Trump, of course, is insane. But the military is resisting because we've already been humiliated. I mean, the consequences of our failure are manifest. We signed this tripart agreement with South Korea and Japan, where we're going to, take on the North Koreans, and we're going to be able to enable them to stand up against China's pressures and all this stuff. And the South Koreans and the Japanese bought into this nonsense. They got invited into the nuclear room, the big room. And they had to play nuclear war fighting planning. And oh my goodness, aren't we important? And then this conflict with Iran started, and we immediately stripped bare all of their air defense, literally all of their air defense. All of the THAAD batteries, gone. Patriot 3s, gone. They've got nothing. Moreover, Japan had been told that, it's time for them to put on their big boy pants. Forget that World War II and your constitutional prohibitions against pretending to be warriors. You're warriors. Act like a warrior. And they said, okay, we're going to buy 400 Tomahawks to use as a counter-strike capability. So if those North Koreans ever dare attack us, we're going to pound them into the dirt. Well, no, they're not. They're never going to have Tomahawks. The United States put them on notice. It just isn't in the works. We have to take control of all production because we're out of Tomahawks. And it's going to take forever to fill our order. You're never going to get them. You might as well get used to that. So we've been humiliated. The military is, I wouldn't want to be on active duty right now because the weakness that we are projecting is beyond belief. It's so weak that I don't even think the Cubans take it serious anymore. So I don't see us going to war against Iran. I see Donald Trump playing stupid word games. But the fact of the matter is nobody in the Middle East wants this conflict. Nobody can afford it. Even Benjamin Netanyahu understands he can't win this conflict. He can't participate in this conflict. There's nothing for Israel. They're getting beat by Hezbollah. They're getting waxed by Hezbollah. Um, there's nothing Israel can do. Again, remember this: Israel and the United States bombed Iran for 37 days straight. There's nothing more they can do. It's not like they went in with the B team. They went in with the A team, the best intelligence they had, the best capabilities, the best weapons. And it's turning out they didn't do anything. They killed an old man in his home. Wow. That's a real big military accomplishment. But when it came to actually degrading Iran's military, it turns out they didn't accomplish anything. The Air Force went underground. Not only did it went underground, an F-5 actually bombed Kuwait. No one talks about that. That old F-5 fighter, about 50 years old, broke through all the air defenses and dropped bombs on Kuwait. Pilot got back. He's a national hero. Um, but their missiles, couldn't be stopped. Their missile production facilities are underground. They're still building this. It turns out Israel and the United States didn't accomplish anything in terms of meaningful impact. And that was with the best we had. So, people keep saying, well, Israel's going to do X, Y, Z. Israel's going to do nothing because Israel has nothing. They literally have nothing left. And they know it. And they know that Iran has everything. So, there won't be a follow on to this war. This war is over. Iran has won. And now Iran's just busy dictating the terms of peace.
Yeah, Ray, some of those terms are still to be worked out will be the nuclear part. And that could be where it all collapses. And frankly, I wouldn't have believed Trump, except these three Iranian officials, the New York Times quotes, unnamed, saying that there is such a memorandum of understanding. But my question to you, Ray, is how will Trump make this look like he didn't lose the war and that it is a better deal in the end than what Obama had, that he tore up?
Joe, maybe I'm being very simplistic here, but most Americans think that Iran is working on a nuclear weapon. We in the intelligence community and the inspectors and everyone else knows that they stopped working on a nuclear weapon no later than 2003, okay? But in this case, the relative ignorance of the American people on this key issue could serve Trump's purpose. He could make out that, look, now I've got the Iranians to sign on a dotted line or to agree promise forever and ever, never to have any ambitions even, much less actually working mechanically on a nuclear weapon. Um, that sounds like pie in the sky, but there's no indication that however much incentive the Iranians have to follow North Koreans' example rather than Libyans, and you know what I'm talking about. Libya gave up its nuclear weapons, North Korea didn't. Uh, I don't see that there's much sign that Iran, number one, feels the need to develop a nuclear weapon at this point, and number two, that the fatwa against it, signed by the president, Ayatollah's father, has been reversed, and that would be necessary before Iran would do this. So, in answer to your question, I think there is a pathway, as they say these days, there's a pathway toward playing on the ignorance of the world community and saying, look, I, Trump, got the Iranians to forswear ever working on a nuclear weapon. And besides, they've given some of their highly enriched uranium to Russia and they're going to dilute it, or they're going to do like Russia did during the JCPOA. So I do see that there's a way that they can let him down gently, and not that they want to, but the stakes are so high. Nuclear weapons are now openly discussed, so that's how I see he could get out of this mess. Maybe I'm wrong. I've been wrong before.
Do you agree with Ray, Scott, on that? That's how he could portray this?
Well, let me start by saying that Iran has never had a nuclear weapons program. It's CIA bullshit about 2003. They never had a nuclear weapons program. There's no evidence they had a nuclear weapons program. There was evidence that they went to the black market to get uranium enrichment capability that was denied to them because of illegal sanctions imposed by the United States at the behest of Israel. And Israel interpreted this as a pursuit of a nuclear weapon, but there was never a nuclear weapons program in Iran. game, set, match, over, done. And it's important to put that out there because when I was a UN weapons inspector in Iraq, I, you know, the Iraqis kept saying, no, we don't have any more WMD. I said, well, but you did acknowledge having it at one point, right? Yes. And what happened to it? Well, we destroyed it. Okay. And now you want us to go dig it up and verify you destroyed it. Yeah. But I have a question. When you had it and you were hiding it from us, who hid it from us? And they wouldn't tell us. And therefore, that opened the door for us to say, well, if you're not going to tell us who hid it from us, we have to assume that they're still hiding it from us. And so we began a series of investigations. This is why I'm a stickler to details. The moment you acknowledge that Iran had a nuclear weapons program in 2003, then you can never once, ever say they have no intent, they have nothing until you confirm what it was. Because if it existed, you have to verify it no longer exists. And this is why I don't accept anybody saying that there was a nuclear weapons program in 2003, because the moment you say that, you create a window of verification requirements. If there was a program in 2003, what was the program? And until somebody tells me what it was, I, as an inspector, as somebody who does compliance verification for a living, I can verify nothing, and you're not in compliance until I confirm that whatever you had doesn't exist anymore, which requires me to determine what you had. So that's why I start off with this. They never had a nuclear weapons program. They never were pursuing nuclear weapons. There's no evidence whatsoever that this CIA crap was true or that anything the Israelis put out there was true. So now we move forward because let me just make it as clear as day. Iran is not seeking a nuclear weapon. No ifs, ands, or buts. Again, no one has been able to provide any information to sustain any allegation of Iranian intent. People like me have done connect the dots. Why did you produce 60% enriched uranium? Listening to the talks of others. And so I agreed that there was the potential. But the fact is, there is no hard evidence that Iran ever did it. In fact, we have the opposite. We have statements from the president, from the foreign minister, from senior people saying we have no intention to do this. And we have the fatwa, religious edict, which in an Islamic republic like Iran is the core thing. And here's the important thing, too. The fatwa isn't just one supreme leader, two supreme leaders, the first two, Ayatollah Khomeini and Ali Khamenei. And now here's the most important part about the third one. He's the son of the supreme leader who said, we will not have nuclear weapons. Do you understand what the importance of this legacy is? The son is not going to contradict the father, which is one of the reasons why the son was made the supreme leader. They didn't want to bring in somebody who was going to reinterpret the fatwa. They brought in the son whose job is to preserve the legacy of the father. And the legacy of the father is Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. End of story. So now we come to Trump. You know, it's not an accomplishment to get Iran to sign a piece of paper that says we don't want a nuclear weapon. Your Highness has been saying, well, where do you want us to sign? Here? You want to sign here? We can initial both copies. Whatever you want us to sign. We'll sign. That's not an accomplishment. You know, and it's this is Trump's chance, because let me go back to the JCPOA. The JCPOA was the worst deal in the world if your job was to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. It was the dumbest deal ever. It shows the pathetic nature of the Barack Obama administration because they were desperate. They had boxed themselves into a corner where they had no option but either to strike a deal or go to war, and they didn't have the gumption to go to war, so they struck this bad deal. The whole purpose of the JCPOA was to create a 1-year breakout window, meaning that if Iran signs the JCPOA, if we detect anything happening through we have this blanket tight inspection regime, and any deviation, any chance the Iranians break free, it'll take them 1 year to acquire enough enriched uranium to produce a single bomb. 1 year. And we believe that in that time we could come up with a variety of pressures and everything to get Iran to back away from that. But the problem is the deal had sunset clauses that undid that whole 1 year window. Suddenly Iran is only allowed to have old centrifuges, but now they can build new centrifuges, then they can field new centrifuges, and then they can begin acquiring stuff. And next thing you know, the 1 year window is 7 weeks, 3 weeks. And that's what happened. By the end of the time all the sunset clauses went away, the 1 year window was down to less than a month. And that doesn't mean Iran was looking to do it. It just means that Iran now had the capacity to enrich and produce fissile material within a month, which means the whole JCPOA was a lie, was a charade. And Barack Obama admitted this in April, 3 months before he signed it. Someone said, what happens about the sunset clause? He said, well, we'll cross that bridge when it comes. We're hoping the Iranians will change their whole attitude between now and then. But if they don't, then we'll make sure the sunset clauses never expire, which means the United States was never going to abide by this deal, ever. We were always going to break it because we only wanted Iran to accept zero enrichment and go to zero, but we couldn't because of the deal. Here we have a chance for Donald Trump to do away with any notion of sunset clauses. Yes, you're talking about 30 days, 60 days, but the deal that they're going to cut means that Iran will be capped at 3.5%. Capped. They won't have the ability to accumulate, enriched uranium. They won't have the ability to have unlimited enrichment, capability. And so there's no 1 year window. There's a zero pathway to a nuclear bomb. Zero pathway to a nuclear bomb. That's a better deal. So it's not that Donald Trump has to spin it. Donald Trump can literally say there is zero pathway to a nuclear bomb. I have done what Barack Obama couldn't do. I have the best deal out here. I am the man who prevented Iran from acquiring a weapon they never had intended to acquire. So I think there's a victory here, and they don't have to have stupid American people and all this. There's a victory here. It's a real victory. He didn't need to do this because the Iranians were ready to give us this exact same deal to us on February 26th. It's the same freaking deal.
Yeah.
But
right.
now we bump ourselves, but we're getting the same deal.
The Obama deal was working, however. The IAEA declared repeatedly that Iran was not enriching beyond what it was allowed to enrich. That's number one. And number two, well, how do you know the details of this current memo of understanding? There's been nothing said about the nuclear issue. How do you know that's going to be capped at, I think, 3.5%?
Well,
Because that's been the negotiating position all along. We know what they've been saying. I've been talking to people who in Iran, the Iranian government has put out details. People have put out details. We don't know what the final MOU is, but I can guarantee you I'll put all the money in my bank account that the MOU is not going to deviate from past practice. We know what the Iranians agreed to in the past, and they're not going to suddenly agree to something different. And the Iranians have been a very hard line on their nuclear side and what they'll accept and what they won't accept. And you could say the JCPOA that was being adhered to. Sure, the Iranians, it wasn't a question of Iran not adhering to it. My point is, as the JCPOA aged out, the adherence of the Iranians would get them to 1 month away from a nuclear weapon. That's why it was a bad deal, because they would do what they're allowed to do, but they're suddenly allowed, instead of having a handful of old centrifuge cascades, they can now deploy newer modern centrifuge cascades with increased enrichment capacity. They could accumulate more stuff, all within the agreement. That's why it was a bad agreement.
Yeah, but the agreement also called for snapback sanctions, if Iran tried to do that. So there was that.
No. Iran tried to do it. Iran was allowed to do it. You can't snap back sanctions if Iran is doing what the agreement allows it to do. That's the problem with the sunset clauses. The sunset clauses basically did away with the 1 year window. And Barack Obama, instead of being mature about it, saying in this year, in the 20 years that it's going to take to get rid of this, we'll have confidence that the Iranians are pursuing purely a peaceful program. So it doesn't matter what they do. They'll be going to Article 4, which allows them to do all this. This is the same as other nations doing. I'm not saying that it's ill intent on the part of Iran. Iran would simply be doing what the Netherlands is allowed to do, unlimited enrichment, because that's what Article 4 allows for. Iran had said at that time that ultimately there cannot be an Iranian exception to the NPT. One of the things they're saying now is that there is an Iranian exception to the NPT, and Iran is going to accept that exception, that they are limited to 3.5% and all this.
All right, Ray. This
Let me,
deal yes,
can
Ray.
I talk a little, Joe?
Yes.
Yeah. No one knows more about what has just been described than two people, Scott and a fellow named Gareth Porter, whom we all know, who wrote the book on it. Okay. Now, he is a quintessential journalist, the receiver of the Martha Gellhorn Prize, and he's been at this for a long time, did great work on Vietnam. And what he did was interview every single person involved in all this. I'm sure he tried to get to interview you, Scott, but I think you were probably on active duty then. In any case, he said they were never working on a nuclear weapon, okay? And he proves it. And he said the only information you have is from Mossad and from these manufactured laptops that the Israelis said, oh, we got a laptop, and look what so it was all kind of confected. So Scott is exactly right. So what happens? There's the debacle on Iraq. No weapons of mass destruction. None. Zero. And that was what, 2003, 2004. But then, as the neocons were saying, real men go to Tehran, okay? So they fully set their sights on Tehran, and some a clever person in a position of authority somewhere in the intelligence community says, "Oh my God, we're going to have to lie about Iran having nuclear weapons now, and weapons. Oh my, let's get a national intelligence estimate, and let's find somebody honest to run it, and maybe we can prevent this war against Iran." Long story short, that happened. They had to go to the Department of State. Fellow's name is Tom Finger. He deserves a lot of gratitude. They said, Tom, you can bring some of your own experts in. You get in there and you have carte blanche to work for a whole year. You can throw away the old stuff. You can look at it. The old stuff, 1990. Iran is about 5 years away from a nuclear weapon. 1995. Iran's about, we'll say, about 4 or 5 years away from a nuclear weapon. Oh, 2000. Oh, maybe 4 or 5. I mean, it was a farce. They never had any good evidence, as Scott has already said. So what they wanted to do is prevent the war based on phony evidence of the kind that was adduced to justify the war in Iraq. They got Tom Finger. He worked for a year. And I think, Scott, you know better than I, he was lucky because they had some real good information come in sort of gratuitously on the side while they were working on this stuff. And they decided in November 2007, Iran has stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work. Unanimous decision by all 16 intelligence agencies at the time. Now, I asked Tom, actually, I know that Gareth Porter asked Tom, well, what about before 2003? And he said, look, there were limits to what I could do with taking on the CIA. Yeah, it suffice to say they're not working. Don't bother me with those questions, all right? So it's clear that Finger was courageous enough. As a matter of fact, Finger hung around in the CIA for a whole year more so he could protect the careers of the people that worked for him producing that estimate. So we're shadowboxing, aren't we? What did Tulsi Gabbard say when that wonderful senator from Georgia, what's his name, Ossoff, when he asked her, now look, in your prepared statement, you said that that Iran's ability to do enrichment was obliterated and doesn't have any more chance to do this. Is that what your testimony? Yeah. Was that the testimony of the intelligence community? Yes, it was. Well, Well, then why do you think that they might be working on a nuclear weapon? Well, we can't say anything. Well, how are they really close? Do we have to preempt it? Well, that's for the president to say. We really can't say. He says, "Well, wait a second. You're giving the threat assessment, right? And you say the threat. Well, the president's going to decide what the threat is. That's the kind of garbage going down. Isn't it ironic that given all this history, it's a kind of a blessing, in my view, that nobody pays attention to us on this one because everybody can say, "Whoop, Donald, you got us out of here." And there won't be any wide war, wider than it already is. And maybe people come to their senses in Europe as well. Uh, in other words, it's a strange kind of paradox, but I guess you and I agree on this one, Scott, that there is a path, as people say, that pathway out of this. It's just whether, in my view, Bibi Netanyahu will be able to put the kibosh on this one as well. And I just don't know how to gauge that.
Well, that was going to lead me to Israel, but before that, there's some details that we don't know about, like the 60% uranium that was mentioned. That was a bargaining chip, but looks like that Iran did that for that reason, even though I think that led to the snapback sanctions. And we don't know about their demands that the U.S. leave the region or that the sanctions are lifted on Iran and any frozen assets be released. So there's a lot of details there. But let's move to Israel and this part of the equation, Scott. The New York Times has a piece this morning. I think it overstates itself, but that's my view that Iran said that Israel was now the passenger, it says, to the U.S. train here, that the United States is calling the shots and Israel's in a subordinate position to Trump. I don't know if you read it this morning, but is that true? And we'll find out, won't we, if this deal goes through?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the people the New York Times was talking to, and I'm not privy to what's going. What I can say is, again, I just come down to logic. We know that there's a very strong pro-Israeli lobby in the United States, and we know that Donald Trump has surrounded himself with pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist people who populate his inner circle, the cabinet, etc. And we know that Israel got us involved in this war in Iran. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu made the case on February 11th, together with the director of the Mossad. Marco Rubio has acknowledged that we went to war on behalf of Israel. He later, tried to clean that up, but he told the truth. And we also know that we lost this war. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We lost this war. It's a strategic defeat for the United States. It's amazing what happens when you suffer a strategic defeat, how few options you have. We are very limited on the options that we have going forward, which means that no amount of Israeli leverage can get us to do that which we lack the capacity to do. And so right off the bat, that's a disenfranchising reality for Benjamin Netanyahu, because a lot of what he does is put pressure on the United States to do things in support of Israel. We're not in a position to support Israel anymore. Not in terms of the immediate, range of options available. We just can't resume a conflict with Iran. We can't do it. I mean, it's a statement of fact. The strategic defeat we have suffered will increase by an order of magnitude should we go forward with this. Has anybody thought what it means to have the United Arab Emirates cease to exist as a modern nation state? Do they understand the ramifications of the depopulation of Abu Dhabi and Dubai? Well, the UAE certainly understands that, and they see it staring them right in the face. They did a vulnerability assessment. It's over. Game, set, match. The second Iran says, we're taking out your desalination, you have no water. You can truck it all in. There ain't enough. And when they take out your power generation when the temperature's 54 degrees, you got no air conditioning. Life is unlivable. No refrigeration, no power, no money, because you lost all of your energy production capability. It's the end of the United Arab Emirates, which means if you can kill the UAE, you can kill Kuwait, you can kill Bahrain, you can kill Qatar, you can kill Saudi Arabia, and they will die. I think there's a wake-up call right now in the Gulf Arab states saying we're really in big trouble here because we can't defend ourselves, and Iran has retained the capacity to bring harm to us, and America can do nothing to stop this, preemptively or defensively. So this is the reality that Donald Trump operates in, and Benjamin Netanyahu will never be able to alter that reality because the Israeli Air Force proved that it can't solve the Iranian problem either. 37 days, the Israeli Air Force had a chance to go in and do their magic, and all they did is kill an old man. That's it. They didn't do anything else. So Israel's got no cards. Israel tried to make itself relevant by expanding the war into Lebanon. Well, two things happened. One, Iran didn't abandon Lebanon. They were supposed to. They were supposed to be beaten into submission and say, well, we're going to worry about ourselves. We're going to ban. Iran said, nope, we are an extension. We are one. Two, Lebanon kicked the crap out of Israel. Israel got sucked in. Now they're stuck. They're fighting head to head in the villages, and Israel's losing the stand-up fight and losing the fight into the rear area. Hezbollah is deploying FPV drones. Israel does not have a solution to FPV drones. This should be a wake-up call to all Western militaries. What happens when you go up against an opponent like, let's call it Russia, who's very good at using FPV drones? It will be the end of you militarily. And Israel right now is stalled. They can't do anything. And this is why I think it's not just the sidelining of Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel now has no choice but to accept a peace arrangement where there's a ceasefire in Lebanon, and eventually Israel's going to have to get out of Lebanon. And this is a huge victory for Iran and for Hezbollah. So, I can't tell you who called whom and who said what to whom. All I can do is, throw some dots on the map and connect the dots and try and see what picture it puts forward. The picture's not very good for Israel. They literally hold no cards in this game. They can't fight Iran by themselves, and America's not going to help them fight Iran. They were hoping to align with the United Arab Emirates, who was playing stupid games for a little while, but the UAE just woke up to the fact that they will die instantly if the war is resumed. Therefore, they no longer have an appetite for war, which means Israel no longer has an entree in the Persian Gulf to, use as a springboard for continuing the conflict. I think despite everything that Benjamin Netanyahu may want, peace may actually break out, because there are no other alternatives. He can't continue this war.
Ray. Scott says that Netanyahu has no cards, but lots of people, including us here at Conservative News, have been saying that one of the cards he holds was the Epstein videos and files about Trump, and that he could hold that over Trump and try to get him to do something. So if this actually does happen and there is a peace deal, does that mean he didn't have the cards or he didn't play them? What's going to happen with that? The moment of truth.
Well, Joe, I was going to pick up on the no cards thing, but I think even more important than Epstein, who can gauge how much influence Epstein has, is the fact that in dire straits, Israel has nuclear weapons. I hate to bring that up, but in extremis, let's look at this guy, Netanyahu. Well, he does genocide, he does forced starvation. He does a lot of things, but would he ever use nuclear weapons in extremis? I think he would. Okay. Now he's in danger politically. They're coming after him, actually. As I read the stories coming out of Tel Aviv, he could very easily end up in jail in that bridal suite that they're prepared for his wife and for him. I don't think he'll come to that. I think he'd probably get out of town right quick. But I think he's totally discredited. And as Scott says, there's not much he can do except, and that I would say is, except either threat or actually deploy one of these, not one, but his nuclear potential. Would that be crazy? Would that be counterproductive? Well, yeah, but that's what you do when you're in extremis, and that's what you do when you don't give a rat's patootie about killing a whole bunch of people. And that fits the description, in my view, of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Can I just add one thing, though? Israel's not a dictatorship. Benjamin Netanyahu is not the chief executive, and he doesn't make that decision. Benjamin Netanyahu literally cannot pick up the phone and make that decision. There has to be a war cabinet. It has to be a consensus-based decision to have any legality. And so I just, there's no way that the war cabinet would sit there and go, "Oh, Bibi's afraid to go to jail, so he wants to nuke Iran. This is a good idea. Let's do that one." You see, there's consequences to Israel using nuclear weapons. One, it would be fatal to their relationship with the United States. Again, I keep bringing up to people the fact that this policy of deliberate ambiguity, which dates back to Nixon and Golda Meir, is the letter of the frickin' law. It's not optional for Israel. Israel doesn't get to use nuclear weapons unless they go through a very, truncated process, a defined process. I lived through it during the first Gulf War. I watched it happen. I watched Israel bring the Jericho 3 missile out. I watched Israel launch the Jericho 3, which is a nuclear capable missile, the exact distance that it takes to go from the launch pad to Baghdad, but they flew it into the Mediterranean. It was a signal, which is what they're obligated to do, telling the Iraqis, if you hit us with a chemical weapon, we will nuke Baghdad. Now, they didn't declare they had a nuclear weapon. They just declared that a weapon capable of carrying a nuclear weapon could hit Baghdad. Message received. We tracked that the entire time. That was several years ago, so I don't think I can get too much trouble. I'm just going to say that if you think that Israel gets to move its nukes around without us knowing, you don't know anything about what we do. Israel doesn't move its nukes without us knowing. We know everything about Israel's nuclear weapons program. And what we don't know is, what goes through Benjamin Netanyahu's mind. But again, he doesn't have the authority to launch nuclear weapons. He doesn't get to wake up in the morning in a rage and push a button. It's a consensus-driven decision-making process that has clear consequences if they use it without America's green lighting. And you won't get America's green lighting unless you go through the process. And Israel has a record of going through the process. They never get up to the launch point, but when Israel wants to make a point, they do what they're obligated to do. And the other thing I just want to bring up, there is no such thing as a Samson option. There is no Samson option. Seymour Hersh wrote a book called The Samson Option. Read the book. It's a hypothetical. It's a name somebody else threw out there. There is no document that says this is Israel's nuclear war plan. This is what Israel's going to do. It's a hypothesis that people have put out there about what would happen. Why does Israel have nuclear weapons? Well, it's to destroy the world, like Samson brought down the thing. There's no Israeli stated policy for that. So we've blown a lot of, we've inflated this this dummy and populated with ideas. But the reality is Israel's nuclear weapon program has constraints, has limitations, political and technical. And I'm not worried about Israel launching nukes against Iran. I'm not worried about it at all, because the situation that would require Israel to launch nukes would have to be an existential threat to the state of Israel. An existential threat to the state of Israel. Bibi Netanyahu is not the state of Israel. He may think he is the state of Israel, but he is not the state of Israel. And nobody in Israel believes he's the state of Israel. And Israel will not use nuclear weapons to save Bibi Netanyahu's skin. That's my belief.
That's very reassuring. Actually, it is, honestly. The only problem I have is that the Israelis also have a reputation for going ahead and doing things and not asking for our permission, but later sort of asking for our understanding or forgiveness. I grant you that it would be extreme in this case, but that's the worrying precedent that I see. And I said this would have to be in extremis, whether it was a threat, an extreme threat to Netanyahu alone or to the Israeli state. I think then all bets are off, and I think that Israel probably would not go through all these regulated things to make sure that the U.S. approves. The U.S. would not approve. I'm sure you agree. And so, it's one of those unknowables, but it's one of the cards I think that we have to pay attention to.
I just looked at Haaretz's coverage of this, and they're saying that Trump has now told CBS News he'll only sign a deal when he gets everything that he wants. Also, there's no word in this article from Netanyahu, which in an Israeli newspaper, so he hasn't reacted yet, not officially. And Trump says that it went well with Netanyahu on the phone, whatever that means. Now, the Iranian foreign ministry spokesman is quoted as saying that what this memo of understanding actually is a framework, a non-binding framework agreement to extend the ceasefire by 60 days, during which these details will be worked out. So maybe that's what we're about to enter, which is hardly the end of the war. If you guys want to react to that.
I don't believe the war will ever end. I mean, again, I just come down to the fundamental concept: the United States is agreement incapable. So Donald Trump his ego will get in the way of everything. There will be, I believe that there will be a memorandum of understanding that creates a framework for continued dialogue. And I believe that from that dialogue, there will be arrangements made that allow oil to flow from the Strait of Hormuz, which is an absolute essential for all parties involved, including Iran, by the way. And there will be some sanctions relief, not all, because again, what people have to understand is Donald Trump can't undo acts of Congress. And many of the sanctions imposed against Iran are congressional-based sanctions, which means that Congress would have to end that. And Congress isn't inclined to be weak on Iran. So I don't think there's going to be this awe-inspiring peace agreement where angels are going to come down from the heaven and trumpets are going to sound. The United States is incapable of that kind of agreement. I think what there's going to be is we're going to find a soft spot that allows the global economy to function, that allows Iran to, get its economy back on track, to integrate with BRICS and the SCSO and everything. But also, Donald Trump's just going to screw it up. On occasion, we'll intercept a boat. On occasion, I don't think we'll bomb Iran because that's an absolute no-starter. But we aren't going to lift all the sanctions. We're not going to return all the frozen assets because Donald Trump's incapable of such an agreement. Because if he did that, it's 100% capitulation. It's just a known capitulation, and he can't afford to do that. Donald Trump has to ride into the midterms, creating the perception that he's large and in charge. So I'm not waiting for a peace deal. There's not going to be a peace deal in my mind. What there's going to be, I believe, is a memorandum of understanding that meets the definition the Iranians put out, and things will happen. Oil will flow, but there won't be active war. But the concept of a peace, the way most people would recognize it, a peace based upon a treaty relationship. The United States is treaty incapable. We're agreement incapable. Donald Trump's incapable of entering into agreement with anybody. And even if he did, he'd break it within a month because that's just who he is. So, that's what I'm looking at.
Well, right. None of the stated goals in Iran were achieved. There was no regime change, which this particular Israeli government, under this most extreme in the history of Israel, sees this as the opportunity they've been waiting for decades. Netanyahu said it himself, to actually try to get that done. And they had Donald Trump to let them do it, where other presidents had said no. Trump said yes. And yet they were unable to overthrow the regime. They were unable to destroy the ballistic missiles of Iran. The CIA says 75% still intact. As Scott has pointed out, the Iranian foreign minister said they have 120% because they've been able to not only restore what they lost, but increase them. And also, well, what else they didn't get done? They didn't overthrow the government. They have not stopped the enrichment program. Nothing was solved. We see that the U.S. lost the war. We all have new details that the U.S. lost 42 Reaper drones during the war. So these details are starting to come out now. But what Scott just said was he doesn't think there's actually going to be a deal to end the war. Do you agree with that? And could this start up again? under Trump.
I
After
think Scott is,
yeah.
I think Scott is right. But the real core of the interest here is opening the straits, right? And not attacking, not Israel and the U.S. attacking Iran. I don't know how you work out the rest of it, and that probably will take until after the midterms. But I do see that if they could come to the kind of understanding where, okay, there's a ceasefire, well, ceasefire in the sort, in the sense, no more attack from Israel and the U.S., and the opening of the strait under conditions that would be negotiated, tolls, no tolls, some tolls on some people. That's possible. That's possible tomorrow. And the interests of the whole world hang on the balance on this. Worldwide depression, my God. So the incentive is there. The Iranians have the higher cards, it seems, in this case. And if the Saudis and the Qataris and the UAE are not going to be relying on U.S. power anymore, well, the game is over, the more so if they won't let the U.S. overfly their territory or fire missiles over them. So I agree, the chances of a renewed war are very slim. And I think there's the making of an agreement, not a full-scale agreement, but before the midterms, I think that Trump has to do something to take the burden a bit off his own shoulders.
Okay, last thing on Iran, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty every 5 years has a review conference, and they just completed a couple of days ago a month-long conference at UN headquarters in New York. I've covered a couple of those in the past. Ray, I don't know. Sorry, Scott, I don't know how close you followed it, but apparently the U.S. insisting on condemning Iran in some documents sabotaged the whole thing. It fell apart, and there was no consensus agreement. That's happened before at these NPT conferences. Did you follow it, and how significant is this?
I followed it peripherally. I don't I don't think you can have a viable NPT conference at this point in time, given the corruption of the IEA process. The fact that, I mean, they can't square the reality that Iran has done nothing wrong, and in international law is being corrupted by the United States, and Israel stands outside of it. To be honest, I just stopped following because it's a joke. The NPT conference means nothing. It's just a bunch of people coming together trying to support a treaty that no longer has any relevance because the United States has made it irrelevant. So there's just too much else going on right now, like a real war in Iran. And I don't know if you saw it, but Russia fired an Oreshnik into Kiev and hitting them with things. And we don't know how long this escalation is going to go and how's it going to end. But these are the things that matter to me, not a bunch of idiots in New York City talking about a treaty that none of them treat with respect anyways.
Well, let's move on to the other things that are happening. One of them was the summit in China on Wednesday, but that seems like old news now. What I did not see that Russia fired an Oreshnik into Kiev. Was that in response to the Ukrainian attack on a dormitory that killed at least 8 students, and there are still like 15 missing? Was that in response to that?
110% response to the Iranians murdering sleeping children.
Yeah.
Ukrainians murdering sleeping children. Yeah, let's just call it what it is. It was a deliberate attack. Wasn't an accident. They knew what this target was, and this was Zelensky's playing a very dangerous game together with the British. Trying to create the conditions inside Russia that could bring about a collapse of support for the government of Vladimir Putin. In order to do that, you have to create the perception of weakness, and they've been doing these piecemeal escalations across the board, and each time Russia has pragmatically withheld from any overreaction because they were containing the problem by winning on the battlefield. But the British, with the Ukrainians, found a loophole, and that loophole were the drones, long-range strike drones. And we know, the statement, perceptions create their own reality. And the continued ability of Ukraine to launch these drones and strike strategic targets violating red line after red line after red line, has created the perception of weakness on the part of Putin. The British, if most people may not know this, the British, have are building 20,000 drones for the Ukrainians. The drones that are being used to attack right now. The Ukrainians are talking about in June launching 6,000 drones in a day, a mass barrage against Russia. Zelensky now is saying openly that he will be attacking a number of targets and creating the impression that the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is on the target list. So the Russians are waking up and they're saying this is an unsustainable path that we're on. And what this attack against this school was a test of Vladimir Putin by the British. And and now it's let's see what Russia does. Yes, an Oreshnik went in. We don't know. It actually didn't hit Kiev. It hit a place called Bieli, whatever, Kripolska, White Church. It's a town 60 kilometers south of Kiev. The Russians have been hitting this place. There's an airfield there, and the Russians have been striking this consistently. So there's something there. Even though I can't find any reference to underground facilities, there is reason to believe that may have been an evacuation point for some critical leadership, maybe Zelensky himself, and that this was a decapitation strike by Russia using the Oreshnik, which was a very concentrated strike. If you saw the first strike of the Oreshnik, you saw the bus doing a dispersal of munitions, so that you had the Oreshnik submunitions hitting here, 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 here. This one is literally total concentration of the total destructive power of the Oreshnik into a single concentrated zone, which led some people to speculate that that's that they're looking to penetrate an underground facility with extreme precision to terminate the lives of anybody in there. So we'll see. We don't know. We'll find out tomorrow. But I would also be very if they didn't kill Zelensky and they don't follow up, then they haven't changed anything, because the perception will be then that this is just another token slap done by the Russians that didn't fundamentally change anything, and Zelensky will continue to do this. We're in a very dangerous state right now, because there are things going on that haven't been going on before. I know Gilbert Doctorow and others have been saying that there's this unrest, but Gilbert Doctorow was always predicating his stuff based upon existing structures of discontent. The pro-Western liberal remnants, etc. This is a new phenomena that postdates Gilbert Doctorow's assessments. This is something that's newly happened that he didn't predict, and it's something the British have been working on. There's a retired lieutenant general named Andrei Ilnitsky, who was a senior advisor to Defense Minister Shoigu, and he is the co-author of a concept called mental warfare, in which he tracks how people use information warfare and how they use it's not just disinformation, information operations. This is actually designed to get in and cause nations to collapse from within. And the British are playing mental war against the Russians right now. And you can see it's starting to catch hold. Russians are starting to doubt Russia, starting to doubt structures, starting to doubt who they are, what they are, all the things that Vladimir Putin, worked to accomplish in 25 years. You're starting to see doubt springing in, and the goal of the British is to get a collapse, is to get a Moscow Maidan moment, not from the liberals, but to have actually the Z bloggers and the former Wagner and the Russian patriots come in and say, we're done with this. We have to win the war now. A total collapse of confidence. We're not there yet. But the danger is this school. I'm in contact with some very senior people in Russia right now about this school. This has resonated more deeply than anything. what the Ukrainians did here was a fatal mistake, because this Russia is at a point right now where the emotion of this moment is being magnified far bigger than the tragedy obviously is. This is becoming a key critical focal point, and it is defining the emotive state of the Russian nation right now. And it's essential that the Russian government be seen as responding effectively to this. Like I said, I have my hopes up. I'm hoping that Zelensky was somewhere underground in this white church little town, and that he no longer exists, and that he and his cohort are dead. And the Ukrainians wake up tomorrow to find out that they're leaderless, and understand that whoever replaces Zelensky will be killed if he continues to go down that same path. This is the signal that Russia has to send, that to do stuff like this to Russia is an automatic death sentence, not just for the Ukrainian leadership, but potentially for all of Ukraine. Or this could just be another one of those where the Russians fire, missiles into an empty space, and it goes boom, and you go, huh, see, we have the potential. The potential no longer hacks it. The potential won't stop Ukraine from carrying out their June plan. Ukraine has a June strategy. Zelensky has bragged about this June strategy. And if he's allowed to implement this June strategy successfully without the interdiction of the Russian government, the Russian military, I think this summer could be a long, hot summer for Vladimir Putin.
Update on the attack on the dormitory. 21 students now dead after the search operation concludes. And as
let me
Scott,
just
as you pointed out, Scott, just a moment, the Ukrainians hit that place 3 times, so it was clearly not a mistake. Yes, Ray.
3 waves, yeah. Immediately thereafter, Putin got up and said, I'm requesting options from the Ministry of Defense as to how we react. Do we now have that? Scott, do I understand you to say that a Russian has been fired into Ukraine as retribution for that, for the killing of the college girls and boys? That happened
100%.
today?
It's
It
happening
did.
as we speak. It
Okay.
just happened right before the show. And several Iskander M's have been fired into the vicinity of Kiev as well.
Well, I'm sort of sad because I was just about to predict that would happen before you told me it already happened, and that I would have been right for once. Now, this is beyond the pale, and it's very much like the Minop slaughter of those 163 little girls. I mean, it is emotion laden. And my own read is that Putin will be discreet in how he lets himself be provoked, but apparently has already done what we all expected, an Reshnik. Dnipro, or a place near there, Scott? He's done one in 2, maybe in Dnipro. Where is this one? Outside of where
Right.
the
There's a town called Bieli. It's basically White Church. And yeah, and this is where the Oreshnik hit. And as I said, the most likely target there is a Ukrainian air base that has been struck repeatedly by Russia in the past. A lot of Shaheed activity around there. So there's something going on there of interest to the Russians, but this was a concentrated Oreshnik strike, which implies that some Ukrainian leadership may have left Kiev and taken up temporary residence here, and received a. I don't mean to laugh. I apologize, but I have to laugh because otherwise I'd cry, because I'm in contact with Yana Lantratova. She's the newly appointed ombudsman for human rights, and she's leading the investigation into this. And it's just devastating. It's just absolutely devastating. The numbers may not be what we had out of Iran, and I'm not trying to downplay what happened in Minab. It's a horrible crime, but as you know, for instance, and I got to be careful. But we know that there are moments, I can use the term, Rodney King. one man, one police beating led to the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. This Russia has the frustration that exists in Russia right now about the Ukrainian drone strikes, the audacity of the Ukrainians and the relative impotence of Russia in terms of their response it's seething in Russia right now, seething. And this incident has coalesced everything. All of the anger and angst and frustration of the nation has come together in this incident. This is the incident. This will go down in history, I believe, as the straw that broke the camel's back. When people evaluate either why Vladimir Putin's government was overthrown in the summer of 2026 or Russia won the war in the summer of 2026, it's going to come down to this drone strike. How Russia responds to this drone strike is going to determine the future of not just Russia, but of Europe, because the emotions now it's just visceral. It's visceral.
Okay, now, Scott, who's to blame? In other words, it was fired from Ukraine, I assume. Did it require Western technology? And sub-question, NATO technology or including U.S. technology? Who do they blame it on?
These are British-made drones that came in. The British also built a drone that is a command and control drone. So you have these drones are coming in, but there's a command and control drone that comes in, so you can avoid your electronic warfare. So you can skip through, come in, link up. Starlink is involved in this, so Elon Musk is involved in this murder. And then there's AI. An interesting thing is these particular drones, the Ukrainians have adapted them so that they can carry air-to-ground rockets. So these drones come in, and there's multiple reports from eyewitnesses that they were firing rockets into the dormitory, and then coming back, and then firing more rockets into the dormitory, coming back, and then at least 4 of these drones impacted the dormitory. They were attacking other targets in the area. It wasn't just the dormitory; the school got hit. But the idea that this was, in terms of the intelligence. It's like Manab. It's marked on a map as a school. This is a known school. It is only a school. The social media postings of these girls there are just tragic because literally an hour before they died, many of these girls were posting on the Russian TikTok or something like that, doing stupid college girl stuff, doing their stupid little dances and eating food and having fun and all this stuff, just doing what college girls do. And they're dead now, or they're hurt, or they're crippled, or they're blinded, or they're whatever. This was a deliberate act. It cannot be pushed off. The Ukrainians are trying to say that they struck one of the Rubicon headquarters. Rubicon is the Russian elite counter drone unit. So whenever the Ukrainians start doing drones, Rubicon comes in and slaughters them. And so the Ukrainians just say they struck Rubicon. But the only way you could make a linkage between Rubicon and this dormitory is if you used AI, just like we did in Manab, and you use stupid AI, which said just create find me a place that has dormitory capabilities, and we'll just assume that Rubicon's hiding there. Nobody believes the Ukrainians about this. This was mass murder of the most vile sort, and it was done with British-made drones. And I wrote an article. I had to pull it. Because in the article initially, I gave the Russians the targets, the names, the home addresses of every Brit involved in doing this, the directors of the factories. And I said, kill them, mark them for death. But then I decided that probably wasn't the best thing for me to do. So I had a more blunt, more broad spectrum article. But I mean, what people don't understand is that the Ukrainians are killing Russian factory directors. I wanted to interview the director of the Vodkinsk machine building plant. I know his name. I've never talked about it, but I know how to find his name. I found his name. But I'm not going to release it because what the Russians said is they're going to kill him and his family. They're hunting down these. I was going to interview the chief designer. I know who he is. I know his name. I won't release it because the Russians have said they're going to kill them. So they don't want these interviews to take place. The Ukrainians are identifying, Russian defense industry people and marking them for death. They're actively assassinating generals and other people inside Moscow. And so that's why I said, well, turnaround's fair play. We got British factories that are producing drones to give to the Ukrainians to attack Russia. They're our direct participants in the conflict. They are a legitimate target of war. There's no doubt about that. And maybe at some point in time, Russia will start treating them as a legitimate target of war. But we have to see. I can't even imagine that until I see what Russia's done here. We won't know. Tomorrow we'll have a better idea of what was hit and what happened. Is it just one arrest, Nick? I hope not. I hope it's like 12 by the time this is done. I hope they spread load it over the course of several days. I hope every night the Ukrainians go to bed with Oreshniks screaming in their ears because they murdered innocent girls, innocent boys. This was a teachers' college. These students were training to become kindergarten teachers, elementary school teachers. They're the ones that are supposed to be teaching the next generation. And as I said, I'm a new grandfather. These are the kind of people are going to be teaching my granddaughter. And we need them. And the Ukrainians targeted them for death.
Quick question. When Putin is briefed tomorrow morning by Belousov and Gerasimov, first question, I'm Vladimir. Okay, who did this? The Ukrainians using British technology. Any U.S. involvement? Not that we know of. What do you mean, not that you know of? Was the U.S. involved or not?
Yes, U.S. was involved.
How do you say that, Gerasimov? What do you say? How do you say that? Why was the U.S. involved?
Let me spell it to you, Vlad. Starlink.
That's Elon Musk. That's not the U.S.
That's America. That's okay. America. We know he has contracts. He wouldn't be allowed to do those contracts unless the United States government approved of it.
Okay, Gerasimov. Second question. Outside of Starlink, was there any necessity for U.S. intelligence or technological stuff? Yes or no?
Yes. Vladimir Putin, you know as a fact, why the hell did you order me to give a chip to the American attaché in Moscow? Because you know that chip contained information that proved American intelligence was used to target you for death. So stop asking stupid questions, Mr. President, and pull the frickin' trigger.
But you say it was the English. You say it was the English. I ask once again, do you have proof of U.S. involvement other than Starlink?
Yes, we do. We have the chips recovered replicate the same fucking chip we gave the Americans.
This time, today.
I'm sure we recovered.
Okay.
I can't say. I don't know. Gray, I'm not there. I don't know. I'm just saying that the debris are there. They will find the chip. The chip will give away the evidence. The way this thing went down is the exact same methodology used in the past. Past patterns repeat perfectly, Mr. President. So yes, we have every reason to believe the United States was involved.
That's not good enough. I want the parts. I want the parts of the
parts.
Well, you have them already, and you acknowledge you've examined them already. That's good work. Have you?
We're pretty fucking good, Mr. President, because they killed your fucking kids. All right. So now we've got there. We have the parts. We know it's a British-made drone. We know the serial numbers on the drones. We tracked it back to the factory, Mr. President. So why aren't you blowing up the British factory, Mr. President? Give me the order.
Gerasimov, listen to me, huh? What I hear you saying is the British did it. What I hear you saying that when you get some of the parts of this thing, you will be able to tell me that the U.S. was involved outside of Starlink. You bring me those parts and brief me thoroughly by 12 o'clock this noon, Mr. Gerasimov and Belousov, because I want to make a distinction, as we all have been making this distinction, between U.S. behavior on Ukraine and British, French, German, all that stuff. So if you can show me that the British and the Ukrainians couldn't have done this without U.S. active involvement, I will make decisions appropriately. If you cannot show me that, I think we still have to give Mr. Trump the benefit of the doubt that he really does want to get out of there. He's not responsible for egging the Ukrainians or the British on. So noon, that'll give you 4 hours, Mr. Belousov. Can you do that?
Well, just one question, Mr. President. What part of Starlink don't you understand? Do I have to headbutt it into you? Do I have to tattoo it into your forehead? What part of Starlink do you not understand?
Okay. So Starlink is the key. In other words, they were using that, and that's enough to implicate the United States government. Doesn't everybody use Starlink? Doesn't everybody use Starlink? I mean, it's not sensitive, top secret material, is it?
Well, I don't know. We have a precedent of the United States cutting off Starlink to disrupt Russian drone operations because the Russians had tapped into it. So again, we have precedent, Mr. President. We have precedent. You've been briefed on it. Have you forgotten already, Vladimir? Are you old enough now that your brain doesn't work on Sundays? I mean, you know.
Look, I just talked to my friend, my good friend Xi in Beijing. It is clearly 2 against 1 now. We want to know how hard-ass we need to be against the United States, but we want to do anything prematurely. So give me that evidence, and I'll crank Starlink in, and I'll decide who I should feel worse about, the British or the US or the Ukrainians. In other words, there's distinctions to be made. I'd like to make that distinction, but I need the evidence. Got that, Gerasimov?
I gave you the answer, Mr. President. You're just going to pussyfoot around, and this is why there's going to be a coup against you if you're not careful. All right, we're not playing games anymore.
Yeah.
There's dead children, and you got to do something about this. I told you it's Starlink. We briefed you on Starlink. You know what Starlink does, and you want to pretend that it's not an American decision-making cycle involved in this, then that's your fantasy. You're just like Donald Trump. You live in a fantasy world, and maybe it's time for us to remove you from power. I don't think Putin would ask those questions because he knows the answers. He knows 100% that the United States is involved. He knows 100%. The CIA admits now, remember, the CIA admitted targeting him. In their article in the New York Times, the CIA said, we are working with the Ukrainians, giving the targeted information so they can bypass all of the air defense and strike these oil rigs with straight thing. So all of that they admitted to, because turned up to be in the chip that they found trying to target Putin. So it's the same thing, the same patterns.
Yeah. Well,
What
look,
more do you want to say?
if I'm Putin, I'm afraid of a nuclear exchange eventuating out of all this. Trump is thoroughly unpredictable, irascible. He may be even sick. He is sick in the head. Uh, I just want to be able to know exactly what went down, and you're confident that you could tell me the right story. When you get those pieces of that missile and so forth, show me. I'll talk to the people in the Luhansk, and we'll decide what we'll do next. But not until then are we going to use another Areshnik.
Well, Mr. President, I just want to remind you that Xi Jinping, in talking with your good friend Donald Trump, when confronted with the fact that the United States was promoting a $14 billion defense acquisition by the Taiwanese government, said if they do that, we will be at war. He used the term conflict. Straight up.
Conflict. Yeah.
Conflict. Yeah. That means war. I mean, I don't know. I'm a Marine. But and as a result, the $14 billion sale of weapons is no longer happening because Xi
postponed.
Xi, it's not going to happen. So Xi drew a line and said, you cross this line, there will be consequences. Mr. President, I advise that you call up Donald Trump and draw a similar line. Because Xi's not afraid of a nuclear war. Why are you?
I don't think that Xi had nuclear war at all in his mind when he just reiterated in stronger terms Beijing's eternal position that Taiwan belongs to China and that if the U.S. mucks around with that, there'll be conflict. Conflict is a stronger word than they used the last time, but it's still conflict. It's not nuclear weapons. Look, I'm the president of Russia. I bear more responsibility not only for all you people, but for the rest of my citizenry and the peace in the world. I'm not going to jump to any conclusions. Give me the evidence, and I'll make a decision in consultation with you once we have those parts from that missile that did that, or that those missiles that destroyed so many young girls and boys at that college in Luhansk.
Well, I think he already made the decision, though, Ray. The Oreshnik did hit. We got Iskander M's hitting right now. And there's no indication that the Russians are finished for the night. So I think we're going through a hypothetical here. I think Putin already has all the data he needs to have, and the proof is there. The FSB has been all over this. Russian military intelligence has been all over it, to the extent that they actually allowed Russian media to report on the origin of the drone, the serial numbers involved in the drone, Starlink, embedded in the drone. These are details that the Russian government is allowing to be released for a reason, because the Russians have the goods.
They can do that during the nighttime?
Well, the drone attack took place at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
The rescues were pulling the bodies out of the plane at sunrise, and all day long they've been pulling bodies out of there. While they've been pulling bodies out of there, the investigative teams have spent all day combing the area for the evidence that they brought together and briefed the president on, so he could make this decision to strike tonight. But we're literally talking about 24 hours afterwards. So yeah, they had a day to gather this evidence.
Okay, good. I'm satisfied. Let the next Oreshnik fly.
Okay, I got Ray on my side now. Kill them all. Sorry, Joe.
News has just broken. Donald Trump says this was not American involvement, it was South Africa's. Elon Musk is still a South African citizen. U.S. had nothing to do with it.
Is this serious?
No. No, it's not serious. But that tells you something right there that you thought it might have been. That's how crazy Trump is, right? No, I made that up.
Well, don't tell him. Don't
tell him. He may think I'll give him an idea. Yeah, but what gets me is you guys last week had a very, very important and entertaining debate about the response Russia should have to all of this. Scott was saying the big attack on Ukraine would begin on decision-making centers, on Kiev, with the Oreshniks, etc., and that it should extend and could extend to Europe, and you disagreed about going to Europe. Why would Britain and Ukraine do this strike, which was, I don't think any doubt now, a deliberate strike on innocent students, unless they want to provoke this reaction from Russia for another reason? For what do they have in mind? How do they want to respond to Russia's response to this, Scott? Why would they do this now? To provoke Russia?
Mental warfare. I mean, this is actually a classic British psychological operation. The goal of, we got to go back and remember. You remember when, Ray, who was our Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense under Joe Biden, in May of 2022, went to Kiev and then came out. And he gave a speech where he said it's the goal of the United States to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. Now, what does the strategic defeat of Russia mean? Strategic defeat of Russia is centered on three things: economic sanctions designed to collapse the Russian economy. And then through the collapse of the Russian economy, you create political dissent within Russia, domestic political dissent, and then you create the perception of inevitable failure by presenting the Russians with military impotence. And the goal was, and we know this is the goal, was to create a Moscow Maidan. If we go to June 2023, there's every reason to believe that Prigozhin had been compromised by Ukrainian and British intelligence, and that the move on Moscow was actually predicated by communications from British intelligence that they had sources in Moscow that would rise up and support Prigozhin's march on Moscow, that this was a coup attempt, a straight up coup attempt by Wagner against Putin. Now, it turns out that the British, as usual, were wrong, and Prigozhin got called out, and Abdi Aladinov brought in the Akhmat special forces and was preparing to storm Rostov-on-Don and slaughter Prigozhin and Wagner when they made the decision, thanks to the intervention of Lukashenko, to stand down. But my point is that the British have been playing this game. The British want a Moscow Maidan. That's what they want. That's their goal. That's their objective. How do you achieve that? How do you get Russian citizens to storm the center of Moscow and demand the overthrow of Vladimir Putin? Especially when Vladimir Putin is one of the most popular presidents in history anywhere. 80% success support rate. Now it's dropped to 76%, but American politicians would kill for 76% support. You have to do this by mental warfare, and that's what they're doing. This whole drone campaign that the Ukrainians have been running is an exercise in mental warfare designed to sow the seeds of doubt amongst the Russian population. And what they've done is they've gradually picked up. Look, the British are behind everything. The British are behind the initial attacks on the Kerch Bridge. That was a red line. And the British said, test the red line, see what they do. And there wasn't a big response. The British were behind Operation Spider Web. I mean, they built damn trucks, put drones in them, flew them out there, and attacked Russia's strategic bombers. What did Russia do? Limited response, nothing. Another red line crossed. They're hitting Moscow. They're hitting St. Petersburg. They hit Vodkinsk. They're hitting defense industries. They're hitting oil refineries. And Russia's doing nothing. And every day the Russian people are waking up. And instead of reading about the military success on the battlefield, which Russia is enjoying, by the way, tremendous military success. Instead of reading about that, it's another damn drone strike, another drone strike, another drone strike. And it looks like Russia's weak, and they're planting the seeds.
Ray, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but Scott has seized up. Hopefully he'll come back. What were you thinking about what he was saying, that this is British playbook to provoke Russia to see how they'll react, and this time have they gone too far, maybe?
Well, for that purpose, they're relaxing in their membership in NATO. They're thinking that Putin is too perspicacious to risk invocation of Article 5 of the NATO treaty. Um, they like to create all this kind of confusion, and hopefully Scott will be back here. But, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense in terms of really hurting Russia. Yeah, there's more dissent about what's happening within Russia, but with not more anymore, any 80%, 76% or whatever popularity, I think that Putin is not going to let himself be provoked into doing something that he doesn't want to do.
Right.
He's winning in Ukraine, and he could stave off these things. And with respect to Ukrainian drones, well, the Russians, unlike the Ukrainians, do have anti-aircraft and anti-missile batteries and so forth. So the damage has been comparatively slight until 2 days ago with the college. And that's an emotional thing because young people have been killed. Will he
Yeah.
let himself be provoked into risking a nuclear war? I don't think so. Will he let himself be provoked into hitting parts of NATO, cities, or bases in NATO countries? I don't think so. I think that's way off in the future, if it ever, because of his caution and because of his reluctance to take a big risk. And as he's got to factor in, there is Article 5. The U.S. has not said Article 5 no longer applies. And how can you predict what an unpredictable president in the White House might do in reaction to that kind of an attack on a European and a NATO ally?
Right. Well, we're still trying to get Scott back up here. So we'll have to do a one-on-one here. Um, do you think that this is the beginning of, well, we don't know that, but it looks like it might be the beginning of the major attack on Kiev that Scott was talking about? Or do you think this is a one-off just for this school?
The situation on the ground, as I understand it, permits the Russians to clear out the rest of the Ukrainian troops out of the Donbass, out of Donetsk, and pretty much recapture or capture for the first time the parts of Zaporozhye and what's the other region there, and sort of reassert their authority over these regions. Then of course, they'd be up to talking to the Kiev authorities if there are any left. And on that score, you have corruption coming tooth and claw. Zelensky himself, all his people, all his intimate advisors are well, one of them's in Yermak, because I guess he's on bail now, but he was in jail for a while. How long will Zelensky be around? So if you look at what I think is going to happen for the rest of the year, the attrition will achieve Moscow's first objective, and that is to uh, demilitarization, right? That means to demilitarize the Ukrainian army. Now, how about denazification? Maybe this is simplistic answer, but all those Nazis up, maybe there's an Azov battalion still. What are they going to do without an army? Okay. I think they're going to flee to some hospitable place, and then you can have elections. Then you can have a relatively calm uh, a calm resolution to this imbroglio. So I don't see that the Russians are playing as scared at all. They're winning. The attrition has put them in a very good place, even over the last months where they have been making forward progress. The thing that really makes it difficult for me to understand is why the Western media is portraying a Ukrainian victory, is saying that Russia's losing. I mean, they were saying that 3 years ago. Have they learned nothing? And why are they doing that? I mean, is there going to be hell to pay when Europe loses, the Ukraine loses, and not Russia? I guess the answer to that is no. The media can cover their tracks, and since there's only one controlled media, they can explain everything away if they want to. Uh, so, hey, welcome back, Scott.
My computer overheated.
Well,
Oh,
you shouldn't breathe on it so closely.
you have a very
I guess it got as emotional as I did.
yeah, we
Yeah.
both of you overheated. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're back here. What were you saying? Do you remember before you overheated?
I was just saying that this is the Putin's not out of the woodwork yet, that this strike does not alleviate that. It has to be, it can't just be yet another military response that happens and then goes away and we return to the status quo ante. Russia has to change the strategic vector of this conflict in a dramatic way, because the British are executing a brilliantly conceived and implemented plan of mental warfare. They are having an impact on Russia. It's you saw it, again, I'm not a big fan of Gilbert Doctorow, but you got to give credit where credit is due. He wrote an article today where he called out you know he showed the different, two big shows. I mean, again, his analysis, his analytical methodology of relying upon Russian TV shows as the key indicator of Russia is I don't agree with normally, but I just think it's a curious anecdotal piece of information where you have Soloviev Live, you're taking a very hard line, pro Kremlin, Putin could do no wrong stance, and then Dmitry Simes, who is the host of the big game or the great game, having a much more nuanced conversation where it shows that doubt is seeping in at certain segments of Russian society. I think that
that's indicative or symptomatic of an existing problem. And I can just say, and I am in touch with a great deal of people who are extraordinarily patriotic and massive supporters of President Putin. Um, and while they aren't you can just get a feel. It's like I said when I went to the Russian embassy for Victory Day, a completely different vibe, a completely different vibe. And Ray, hopefully you agree that when you have somebody who studies a problem, you have to respect their gut feeling. You'd prefer to have a well thought out PhD thesis to back up things, but you have to respect an experienced analyst's gut feeling when they come in and they start assessing a situation. You have to respect the an experienced operator's gut feeling. So I hope people respect my gut feeling when I walked into that embassy and I'm saying this is a totally different reality. Um, and I think that's indicative of the situation that is in Russia. And so I think that there are now heightened expectations of performance that, if left unmet, could manifest themselves in a way that probably isn't the direction that Vladimir Putin wants Russia to be going in.
Mm-hmm. So if what we're seeing now are the opening salvos of the major attack on decision-making centers in Kiev by Russia, and even attempts at taking a page out of Israel's playbook, maybe of trying to decapitate the leaders, what would be the response from Britain and NATO? If in other words, I call Britain's bluff and stand up to British provocations, what will they do next, in your view, Scott?
What will Britain do?
Yes. What will Britain through Ukraine do if there's a major attack on Kiev?
Not a damn thing. What
Wow.
can Britain do? What do they got? They're gonna, they couldn't mobilize a brigade and get it across the channel. Um, you know, their air force is non-existent. Their fleet's going to do what? What the British have is a very uh, I don't know what's going on, but I hope the computer is not overheating again. So I'll have to be careful
Well,
with
speak
my.
speak more calmly. Don't get it upset.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I am going to calm down. I think my computer's feeding off of my vibe here. But there's nothing they can do. But the real question is what's going to happen if, for instance, if Ukraine were to follow through, we now have Lithuania indicating that they may allow Ukraine to fly drones through their territory to strike Russia. We have Latvia with the Russians identifying 7 or 8 decision-making centers directly linked to Ukrainian drone units using Latvia as a launch pad for Russia. So what happens is I believe the next step will probably be when Russia strikes decision-making centers in Latvia and perhaps Lithuania. There's the big question. It's not about what happens when Russia strikes Kiev. This won't be the first time that Russia strikes. I mean, using an Oreshnik is different, but it's not the first Iskander that's hit Kiev. The question is what happens when Russia says you no longer have a safe haven. And there is a target deck right now that is at least been developed um, to strike the production facilities. I mean, if Great Britain is producing, as we know they are, the FP5, the Flamingo 5 uh, long range cruise missile, and providing it to Ukraine ready to fire, and Ukraine launches this and it's striking Russia's strategic depth. Ray knows this. This is exactly what Russia said they can't allow to happen. If you go back to December 2021, January 2022, one of Russia's big concerns was Ukraine being used as a launch pad for NATO missiles. And Russia said, this just simply can't happen. This is existential. Well, it's happening right now. It's happening on a daily basis. It's happening. And this is why the Russians are frustrated, because the Russians rightfully called it out in 2022 as unacceptable, representing an existential threat. And yet on a daily basis, NATO-made missiles based in Ukraine are being fired against Russia's strategic depth on a daily basis. So why there was a time when Great Britain was afraid of doing something that might push us into World War III. They're doing it. They're doing it. We've done everything. We've given them F-16s. We've given them, now Germany's talking about giving them Taurus missiles, just going to do it. Give it to them. Why? Because every time Ukraine, with the backing of Britain and others, pushes past a red line, Russia does nothing. Russia does nothing. Now Russia's doing something, but again, now the question is, how far will Russia go? Because if they want to play this game of, controlled escalation, Russia's going to lose. Russia will lose this. The only way you alter this present course is to change the paradigm completely. And the paradigm must be predicated on a Russian response so terrible, so horrific, so awe-inspiring in the wrong way, meaning fear-inspiring, that that the West no longer feels that it's in their best interest to continue to pursue the policies that they're pursuing.
Yeah, let me chime in here and point out that the press office of the CIA equivalent in Moscow, the SVR, issued this report a couple of days after our last session last week. The press office of the Foreign Intelligence Service says that drones are being planned to be launched from the territories of states like Latvia. The calculation is made that such tactics will significantly reduce the time launched to target. Now, the Ukrainians emphasized that the exact place of the launch, they told the Latvians, look, you're completely safe because we'll put the missiles and the drones in there, and you can launch it, and no one will ever know where they came from. And so the Latvians, really? And so the Latvians, as the intelligence service of Russia says, not very good at critical thinking. They bought this idea that they could launch missiles from Latvia. There were several located military bases by name of places that these things could be sent to Latvia. Well, that's exactly what was been referred to here by Scott. And they finish up saying, look, these people in Latvia are really not very bright because we know the coordinates of everything. Okay, we don't know the coordinates of those things that we named. And the coordinates of the decision-making centers are well known, and the country's, now get this, the country's membership in NATO will not protect these accomplices of terrorists from fair retribution. Now, I don't think that the Russian intelligence service is going to issue this kind of bizarre public statement while having Vladimir Putin sign off on it. So, whereas last week, I didn't think this would happen. This week, I think it's at least 50-50 that that's a big if the Latvians don't wise up, if the Latvians say, oh, yeah, come on, they'll never know that we're shot from Latvia. If they let that happen, then I think the Russians would retaliate on these bases in Latvia, even though Latvia is a member of NATO. So that changes my view, and the more so since Oreshniks were used apparently today. So yeah, it's pretty dicey. I still think that Putin in control will keep this from going out of hand, and I think that the evidence is such that he's got the support of most of the people that count in the Kremlin and in the defense, in the Ministry of Defense, and I hope that will prevail. But that's more hope than sure thing.
Just to report, I've been reading again. I don't like going off of social media postings on Telegram or X or anything because you never know. But sources that I do follow that have reported accurately in the past, it appears that this strike against Kiev is ongoing, massive. Even the Ukrainians are saying it's the largest strike that has hit Kiev since the war began, and that it's still ongoing. And so if the Russians can continue this and continue it through the day and continue into the next night and the next day and the next night, now we're looking at the kind of strike that will strike that could achieve the objectives that need to be achieved. Because what really has to happen is people have to look at Kiev and say, we can't allow that to happen to us. I mean, the Latvians have to take a look at if it's just a strike that, doesn't inspire fear, then people in NATO will say, well, what are we afraid of? We can ride that one out. But at the end of the day, if you look at Kiev, a major city, and you see it in ruins. Right now, all power is out, apparently. It's very, there's no communications. So the Russians are hitting very specific things. If the Russians can pull this off and create the precedent, the Kiev precedent, we could call it, that could be something that maybe has Latvia wake up and not allow the Ukrainians to go forward. Yeah.
And even Britain, huh? Even the UK.
Well, the UK, it's sort of if I were advising Putin on UK, I'd say, hey, boss, don't let him off the hook, make him fear. But Starmer's out. Why don't we just let Starmer collapse the UK as we want? I mean, because you couldn't ask for a better outcome if you're Russia and you want the British government to fail, it's failing. If you want the British economy to fail, it's failing. If you want the British military to the British can't buy any new equipment until 2030 because they don't have any money. So, I mean, what more damage do you want to do to Great Britain? Just let them continue to commit suicide. They are building drones, but um, yeah, that's a tough one because they are building drones. But and there's drones again. The British people should be thankful my name isn't Vladimir Putin. Because if I found a British drone struck this college, that drone factory would be gone tonight. But that's why Vladimir Putin is the president of Russia, and I'm sitting on my ass in Del Mar, New York, talking.
Lucky thing, too.
So,
Putin and Russians know how it will be portrayed in the Western media and by the Western governments if he hit Latvia, for example. That this is the beginning of Putin's attack on NATO and on Western Europe, what we always feared. I think what you're saying, Scott, is that that will not affect the thinking this time of Russia.
that will not what?
That will not affect Russia's thinking this time, how it will be seen in the West.
If Russia's made this decision, then no, there's nothing that will. If Putin has made the decision, and it looks like he may have to say this is the draw on the line, we're finished. I think, I mean, and Ray can contradict me or back me up, whatever. I think Vladimir Putin is one of the most mature, effective, pragmatic, responsible, leaders in the world today. That he doesn't behave precipitously. So for Vladimir Putin to make a decision means that he has thought through the ramifications of it, that he understands you're putting something in motion. And I don't think Vladimir Putin is somebody who gets taken by surprise. And so, he started this, and I believe his intelligence people are looking at what's happening and that he has already thought through, option A, B, C, where's the intelligence taking us? What can we do? So I think the fact that he's initiated this means that he has a strategic vision and that this attack is designed to help get Russia where it needs to be. And Russia is not a suicidal nation. Ray said it absolutely correctly. Vladimir Putin is responsible for all of the people of Russia. And he didn't just spend 26 years pulling Russia out of the doldrums just to throw it away. And he didn't sit there and spend the last 4+ years executing some of the best diplomacy in the world to position Russia where Russia and China today are the leading drivers of a multipolar world that will replace American hegemony. He's not going to throw that away either. So the fact that he's made this decision means that he has thought things through. And that gives me some comfort again, because I do have trust and confidence in the Russian leadership not to be suicidal. So
that was a good segue into the summit in Beijing, but I had two more questions specifically about Ukraine. The very odd thing that happened in Estonia this week, where apparently a Romanian NATO jet shot down a Ukrainian drone over Estonian airspace. What do you know about this, Ray?
I don't know anything about it other than what you said. I was counting
Okay.
on Scott to answer this question.
All right, Scott. What do you know about it?
About the drone that ended up in.
The Romanians shot down a Ukrainian drone in Estonian airspace. I think it was Wednesday, one day this week.
Yeah, look, the Russians are pretty good at electronic warfare, and we know that Russia has um, done some interesting things in Ukraine to take control of a drone and send it again, have Ukrainian drones attack Ukraine. Um, there's a touch of irony. Russian drone operators are quite proud of the fact that they've been able to um, electronically take over Ukrainian drones and have them do damage on you. I think that's what happened here. I think there are several instances of Ukrainian drones that were on their way to Russia being hijacked by the Russians and then diverted. I think one of the greatest ironies is when the Ukrainian drone struck was it an Estonian oil producing facility? So it was the ultimate payback. Instead of that drone striking a Russian facility, it struck an Estonian facility, and I think it actually led to the collapse of the Estonian defense minister. I think he had to resign, um,
Yeah.
and things of that nature.
Woke
So
up.
this is, yeah, this is you know, th- these are the kind of victories that I guess people enjoy, but they don't change the bottom line is Ukraine will continue to fly drones through the Baltic airspace until a strategic decision is made to stop that. And so far, the Baltic countries haven't been made to pay a price um, that would do that. They have political rhetoric, including people, Kali Kalas, saying things that are very hostile. The Lithuanian defense minister encouraging an attack on Kaliningrad. I mean, all this kind of stuff is taking place. So, even though the Russians are scoring these impressive technological victories, it's not a game changer. It's an embarrassment, but it hasn't, at least yet, caused the Baltic states and NATO to alter the course of action that they're on, which is stunning because I mean, you don't have to be an international lawyer to understand that if you open your airspace to allow weapons to fly through your airspace to attack another country, you are a party to the conflict. If you open it, it would be different if you said, "Oh, you're not allowed to do that. We're going to try and shoot it down." But if you say, "No, come on in," or worse, you say, "Yeah, set up these 7 different covert drone sites, and you can go ahead and launch it from here to reduce the time of flight into Russia," which the Latvians have done, apparently. That makes you a direct party to the conflict. And now you have to ask, okay, well, who else knows about this? Well, we know the British know about this. Does NATO Council know about this? Is this something discussed in Ramstein? Is the United States aware of it? I mean, these are important questions. Um,
One other matter. A week or so ago, Trump pulled 5,000 U.S. troops out of Germany. He's now announced this week he's sending 5,000 troops to Poland. What's that about, Scott? Do you know?
well, first of all, we don't know. They were going to withdraw the forces from Europe out of the reality that that was a strategic direction made by the president. But then the president said that he had made a promise to the Polish president, who's a Trump supporter, and he said, "I'm going to send 5,000 troops into Poland, as opposed to pulling brigade out of Germany." And Congress said, "Oh, not so fast. You don't have the authority to do that. You do have to come through us, and we haven't approved of it." And the other thing is, there's been no practical. You just don't deploy 5,000 troops into Poland. There has to be status of forces agreement. Where they're going to be based. Base housing has to be identified.
Right.
Infrastructure has to be identified. So this is just the president saying things that have no meaning whatsoever.
Right.
Even if we wanted to deploy 5,000 troops to Poland based upon the word of the president, those troops would not be in Poland before the president left office. No. And
Right.
unfortunately, I got to run right now. 10 o'clock was my hard drop, so I
Okay.
apologize.
All right, so let me ask, finish with Ray. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. One last question,
Thanks.
Ray.
Thanks,
Well,
Scott.
two questions. Just your general feelings about this Putin-Xi summit and their joint declaration. They've said things like this before, but in the context of what's happening now, what's the significance of what happened in Beijing?
Yeah, Joe, this was the epitome of what's been happening now in this tectonic shift, which kind of slowly goes for decades. Now it's reached its tip, and you have two against one, no holds barred. Um, Before you could make cases, well, the Russians and the Chinese are, they're close, but they're not identical. They have the makings of a virtual mutual defense treaty, and that has wide implications. Matter of fact, if things get really out of hand, either in Iran or in Ukraine, I think the Chinese would become active participants in as much as they would be prepared to encircle Taiwan in a kind of embargo kind of way, and make the kind of sounds in the South China Sea that would give the U.S. pause. The U.S. Navy is not what it used to be. It doesn't even have enough ships anymore. So I think that Putin and Xi are really close together as never before. I think Putin's been in Beijing 40 times or so, and I think 50 times they've had one or another kind of one-on-one, either by Zoom or whatever. And I know this is anecdotal, but Trump bragged about he's going to get a great, great big fat hug from Xi Jinping, right? Well, I mean, I could almost see she saying, sort of, stay away from me, man. And I'll give you a big, big handshake, but I'm gonna lean this way. Don't even go near me. It was very, and then if you saw the farewell when she is saying goodbye to Putin, and again, take this for what it's worth, but Putin's waiting there, and she goes. And it's a great big, just kind of a hug, and then kind of sits back like he's looking at his little brother. And then as Putin walks off, she goes, you know, that those spoke volumes to me. I like to do more sophisticated analysis on the basis of other kinds of things, but they are very close, and that is probably the most important thing that has happened geopolitically in my lifetime since World War II.
Well, that's quite a say. That's quite a lot to say, and then that's quite interesting. Um, Let me just end the program by asking about Cuba. While all this is happening with Iran, with Ukraine, with Russia, and China, the United States seems to be moving on Cuba, as Trump has vowed. There's a U.S. Nimitz is there off the coast. When the CIA director John Ratcliffe, went to Havana last week to speak to them, and he brought with him apparently an official who was very much involved in what happened in Venezuela, the attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of Maduro. Do you fear an imminent attack on Cuba by the United States, Ray?
That was pretty boorish, wasn't it? Sending Ratcliffe to Havana
Amazing.
with this guy. Clearly, that's what Rubio wants to do. Clearly, Rubio has the president's ear. Uh, they still can't get over how successful their kidnapping of Maduro was, with the help of insiders that cleared the path. I don't think there are likely to be many insiders in Havana that will clear a path like that for any Yankees. Okay, so I think that there is a complication here that Putin might be willing to play some cards here. After all, I go back a long ways. 1962, there was an agreement, okay? The U.S. agreed with Russia not to invade. not the regime change, Castro or Cuba, okay? And Khrushchev said, all right, then I'll take out my medium-range ballistic missiles from Cuba. That was the deal. That was a side deal. Bobby Kennedy said, okay, we'll pull out some missiles from Turkey as well. But that was the main deal. You don't invade Cuba. So, uh, all these years later, has that evaporated? I don't think so. And I kind of think that Putin hinted in that direction when he said, look, these people really need oil. They're really perishing. I'm going to send a big oil tanker down there. And Trump said, oh, okay. And he did. And they went through that little embargo around, or whatever it is, around Cuba, got there. That was a month and a half ago. They still need another one. They need those things because they used to depend on Venezuela, of course, and that was the whole idea. So the thing is this, what do they do after they obliterate what latent military capabilities the Cubans have? It's not going to be like Venezuela, okay? It's not going to be so peaceful and so accommodating by people in the inside. It's going to be very different. And so, what are the intelligence analysts telling the president now is going to happen after Rubio persuades him to attack Cuba? Well, if they're honest, they'll tell him that the Cubans are going to fight to the last person, okay? Because I believe they will. And will that be bloody? Yeah, it'll be bloody. Will that give us a bloody nose in the rest of the world? It sure as hell will in Latin America and in the rest of the world. For what? So Rubio can pound his chest and say, okay, daddy and mommy, look what I did. Okay, for what? All right. So I hearken back to what happened to John Kennedy as soon as he came into office. We had the Bay of Pigs operation planned, okay? Eisenhower had reluctantly endorsed it. They showed it to John Kennedy, and he said, "Oh, wow! So you're thinking of putting this ragtag bunch of Cuban refugees into on the beach there, and what's going to happen then?" And then the operators, Alan Dulles and his folks said, no problem. There'll be an insurrection inside Cuba. They'll depose Fidel Castro because he's very unpopular, just waiting for us. Okay. So Kennedy says, are you sure? Like, no problem, 100%. Okay. And so he says, well, reluctantly, I'll let you do this, but don't count on any U.S. military support. No official, no people in your armed services. Got it? Well, yeah, oh, we got it. Well, they didn't get it because we found a note in Alan Dulles' desk when he died saying, when we get bogged down on the beach, the president will have no option other than to rescue us by sending in armed forces, lest the enterprise fail. Okay, so they're going to get Castro one way or another. Kennedy, to his credit, said, don't you remember what I said? I'm not committing. And you know what happened. Okay, what's the point here? Kennedy says, my God, are these people in the CIA so feckless that they really thought that Castro would be overthrown rather than come down and man one of those artillery pieces himself on the beach? Did they really think that? Arthur Schlesinger, historian of great note, who did some jobs for John Kennedy. Arthur, look into all that sensitive information, how we got into this whole thing and how why they told me that Castro would fall. Schlesinger since 4 months doing this, okay? Comes back and he says, here's my report, Mr. President. The operatives on that part of the agency never told the analysts about the operation or about their telling the president that Castro would be toppled very easily. How do you know that? Going through the whole thing. Have you talked to the Ray Klein, who was the deputy director for intelligence? Yeah, he says, it was news to me. We heard rumors about things happening, but we know what we're told. Well, you're not asked. Well, you're not asked for your assessment, your intelligence assessment on how likely it was that Fidel Castro would fall. Hey, they didn't tell us about it. they wouldn't ask us for that because we might be onto it then, right? So there you have the bifurcation of the CIA. Well, all these fancy operatives wanted to do this thing. They were sure that they could mousetrap the president to providing whatever kind of armed services support they needed, and that's what happened. So, is it any different now? I don't know, but there's that precedent, and it has to do with Cuba. And if they think that they can get the equivalent of Raul Castro and all his best friends just saying, "Oh, okay, we give up and we'll or be overthrown." They have another thing coming. You might be interested, Joe, that we are commissioning a veteran intelligence professionals for sanity memo on Cuba now. We'll have it out in a week, and so if we can get that to the president, at least he'll hear from somebody else, maybe, other than Rubio. And Rubio is the fly in the ointment now. I don't know why the hell the president listens to him on these kinds of things.
We'll be ready to publish that at Consortium News, of course. So, speaking of China, there's not supposed to be a Chinese wall between the analysts and the operatives at the CIA, right?
Well, there is, that was the big debate. Is it good to have we had turnstiles, like if getting on the D train there in Kingsbridge Road. You needed a dime. Turnstiles between the analyst section of that big building that they built just before I joined, 62, and the operators. So you had to have a special thing on your badge to let you go from one place to the other, and very few of us had that. So we analysts never knew what the operators were planning, and it was very seldom that directors who knew how this thing was bifurcated gave us a insight or asked us to pronounce on whether it was a good idea or not, this covert action that was planned. I'll give you an example. Bill Colby, who was a good director in terms of facing into this bifurcation. I was the NIO for Western Europe, for National Intelligence Officer. And he says to me, Ray, we're getting rumors that some of those folks there who are in the Azores because they were thrown out of Lisbon, these superannuated people, they're going to remove those light colonels and majors that studied in U.S. staff colleges and are leading Portugal into a more progressive or a leftist communist way, he says. So we know about this not because anybody told us, but we know that Kissinger's been told us, and we know that Kissinger wants to play with these guys. So. So Ray, I want you to prepare a memo, and you go down to talk to Kissinger. I'll squeeze the skids for you and tell him what a lousy idea that is. Okay, so I did that. He said, "Well, today, thank you very much." And I left, and I said, "Wow, that was guts." Of course, Kissinger and Colby didn't get along, and Colby was fired a couple of months later, not because of what McGovern did, but because all these kinds of things that the rest of us McGovern did. So the problem is that was almost unique. Colby had his head screwed on right after he got out of that Vietnam stuff, okay? He was a good director. He told the truth, for God's sake. He even told the truth about the family jewels. I mean, and that's why Kissinger and the rest of them said, we got to get rid of this guy, right? And they did. And I would add, Joe, for those of you who don't know about what happened to Bill Colby, they ought to look into it because he was a pretty robust guy. Went out in a canoe one night, never came back, drowned. Okay. The Maryland authorities were actually not able to investigate very much because the feds came over and it kind of did, and there was the equivalent of a cover up. And called me a conspiracy theorist, but there are lots of people that had it in for Bill Colby for revealing the family jewels, for A, B, C, not letting them do this or that or the other thing, that I think that he too was a victim of the assassination squads that that the agency and other intelligence services have at their beck and call. So that's big. And the operators never did appreciate the analysts getting involved in things that they had sort of convinced the director to do. And Stan Turner was also somebody who would stand up to them. But outside of Turner and Colby, and I only worked for Turner for about 6 months before I went overseas. Those are the only two I could think of that would not be either complicit like Dick Helms, uh, or just say, okay, well, if you want to do that, you should go ahead and do that. So, and I worked under seven uh, directors of Central Intelligence, and for my last 2 decades at fairly senior levels. So I watched that. It's a problem. And of course, getting back to Cuba, I have no idea as to what those people who still can work on Cuba in an honest way, what they might be telling John Ratcliffe, head of the CIA, and what he might be telling Rubio. Why do I say Rubio? The Director of Central Intelligence reports to the President through the National Security Advisor. So if the National Security Advisor doesn't want the President to get good intelligence or even bad intelligence, he just closes up the entry there and doesn't let him see it. So, and that's, I think, part of the problem with Iran. So, in any case, if the analysts are doing their job, they would be able to tell the president, look, this could be very different from that Patsy thing you had in Venezuela. There are no, not to my knowledge, there are no Cubans that have been recruited with lots of dough to overthrow or to dispose of poor Raul. Was he 74, for God's sake? You know, that's older than I am. No, it isn't. Yeah, it is. Is it? Oh, hang on. So,
No,
in other words, it's a real
he's
problem.
94, right? 94.
I'm
That is
sorry,
older than
94.
that
It's
is
me
older
this
than you.
it's me the 76. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, they just indicted him very much like they indicted Maduro, which is why people think it's the same playbook
Yeah,
about.
on false pretenses. I mean, those people that were shot down by
Yeah.
Cuban air defense. I mean, the people who sent them in knew they'd be shot down. For God's sake, it's just like that thing that the Joint Chiefs of Staff were planning under Kennedy, where an American little plane would be shot down deliberately and blamed on the Cubans, and then we could get rid of all those commies. And what was that called? I can't remember. It was a regular plan that the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA were in on and said, look, we're going to do this. It'll just cost a few American lives, but it'll be worth it to get rid of those commies in Cuba. So we've not come a very long way. I mean, yeah, there's still commies in Cuba, but it's quite a stretch to suggest that they're a threat to the national security of the United States, as Rubio has claimed.
They've never been a threat to the United States, except ideologically throughout the region. I think uh, that's what upset the United States. That it stirred up opposition throughout all of Latin America to the U.S. imperial
Well,
design.
if the Russians or the Chinese put Oreshniks or the like in Cuba, then they would be a threat again. They're not
Well,
going to
that's
do
what
that. It's a different world. They don't have to do that. And so, it's really, well, it's ridiculous that anyone actually would print, as the New York Times and Washington Post do, what Rubio says about them being a threat to the national security
yeah.
of the United States.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a Cuban Oreshnik crisis this time. So, Ray, thank you very, very much for staying with us. And that was extremely interesting about Cuba. And let's see if Russia does act in some way to stop this from happening if they fall through on that agreement. As Russia being the successor government to the Soviet Union, they feel that that deal is still in place, that the United States has agreed not to invade Cuba.
And
So,
on this two
yeah,
against one thing with that incredible statement out of Beijing, which I haven't got all the way through yet, but they're talking about preventing this kind of thing, and they're saying we're
exactly.
we're together in preventing this kind of thing. Now, uh, I think chances are less than even that either Russia or China would do anything overtly militarily, other than supplying Cuba with some defensive weapons. But I think there's a chance in this new tectonic shift world that they would say, you know, well, our rhetoric is great and we make these great statements. Maybe in this instance, we should put some teeth into our statements and kind of rummage around and cause some real problems with our Navy that can't handle a lot of things. And so I would not rule out either Russia or China or both of them with mutual approval, making some saber rattling that had not been made before with respect to Cuba, aside from 1962.
We shall see. Thank you, Ray McGovern, for being with us. And we thank Scott Ritter earlier. Spent
Thank you,
2
Joe.
hours tonight. And Kathy Vogren, our producer, for CN Live. This is Joe Lauria. Please subscribe to the channel. We've begun our spring fund drive. We have a Patreon page for CN Live. If you like these interviews that we have on Saturday nights with Ray and Scott and our other CN Live programs, please consider donating. Again, for Consortium News and CN Live and the world this week, this is Joe Lauria saying goodbye.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.